News Talk 98.9 welcomes you to our new four-county area local podcast series, and our first contributor is Caroll-Lynn, and her podcast is Widow in the Up North Woods, living in the Asable River Valley after losing your spouse.
There's an old saying that says, you can't see the forest for the trees. Being a widow's like that. You get lost in the details of it and lose perspective on the bigger issues. And the bigger issue is, how are you going to handle the next 30 years? I'm pretty determined to figure out how to make the next 30 years the best years of my life. Hello, I'm Caroll-Lynn, and I'm a widow. It does kind of sound like an Alcoholics Anonymous introduction. That one word says it all. Widow. I was once part of something bigger than myself. I was a significant other, I was a partner, and now I'm not. Maybe we should start a Widows Anonymous group and have meetings. But kidding aside, these podcasts are just meant to be a form of encouragement. They're not a number of steps. They won't tell you how to move through the grief. There won't be lists of things that you must do. These podcasts are just my stories. And through these stories, I hope that you can feel a little less alone, a little stronger. Know that you're enough and that your situation is unique. Most of all, remember that you're allowed to do things your way.
This is the fourth episode in the Widow in the Up North Woods series, and it's about making decisions. Up North decisions are hard. The big decisions, like should I stay or should I go? The little decisions, should I plow or should I shovel? Sometimes I don't want to decide, but living up north in the winter, the ground is frozen and you can't just stick your head in the sand. It's easier to talk about what I've done and where I've succeeded rather than my failures. Living alone after being part of a really great partnership means that every decision, from the little stuff like what to buy at the grocery store to the big ones like do I stay or do I go, are ones I have to make on my own. My husband and I were partners. We were yin and yang. We worked well together, and we took really good care of each other. He passed away in December 2020, just a few weeks before Christmas. I don't post a lot on Facebook, and I have just a few friends. If you were to look at my posts, you'd see mostly positive stuff. I've never said that I'm a widow. My close friends know my husband died, but many of my Facebook friends don't even know. It's easy to post the successes, the things I've done on my own. Many friends are honestly in awe of some of the crazy things that I do. What they don't know is that I have to do them. It's not really a choice. I don't want to get out the 50-year-old diesel tractor, especially when it's windy, below 20 degrees. But I need to plow my long driveway. It's because I can't afford not to. And it's not just about the money. I don't see the things I do as choices. I see them as necessities, and that's probably a good thing. Sometimes I want to just stick my head in the sand. I don't want to do anything, but that's really not an option, especially when the sand's frozen. One of the hardest parts about being a widow is that you have no one to talk things over with, no one to act as a sounding board, no one to discuss the options and help make decisions. You're responsible for the outcome of every decision, good or bad. And decisions can make your life harder or easier. Here's an example. Me. It's snowing out there. It's really coming down. Him. Yep, gonna need to plow this time. Me. What's the weather report saying? How much are we gonna get? Him. Oh, 6 or 8 inches by tonight. Well, maybe we should get out there and shovel now and then hit it again before dark. Him. Nah, the tractor can handle 8 inches. We can do it when it stops. Now, things are so different. The thoughts and the one-sided conversations rumble around in my head. The pros, the cons, the what-ifs. The fact is that I'm alone, and if I get the tractor stuck, I'm going to have to figure out how to get it unstuck, or I'll have to call someone for help. I'm going to have to walk down to the end of the road just to make a phone call, or back to the house to make a Wi-Fi call, and if it's cloudy, there's no Wi-Fi, and I know just 3 people I can call. And I try not to call them and ask for help because I don't want to be a pest. I can't be calling them every day, and every day there are things that need to be done. that I really don't know how to do. Sometimes I feel like I don't know how to do anything at all. Making decisions is so hard. It's so tempting to stick your head in the sand and make no decision at all, especially when you're unsure about how to do things. Oftentimes I feel like I live from crisis to crisis, and I'm never able to get ahead of all the things that come up that have to be dealt with. Even though it feels like I have no choice and simply have to do this or that, the fact is that I am making decisions. I do have a choice. I could just give up and move to the city and be closer to my kids. I could expect them to take care of their homes and mine too, but I know I'd be consumed with guilt. I raised my kids to be kind, considerate, helpful, but also independent. I know that I can call and they would come, but I usually decide not to call. I don't want to have to depend on them. When you first become a widow, everyone says, "Oh, call me if you need anything. I'll be glad to help." But I'm afraid most don't really mean it. You call, and they say they'll be glad to come, but they can't come till next week or the following weekend, and you need help right then. Or they recommend someone for you to hire to do it. You get off the phone and just stand there dumbfounded. It took so much courage to call and ask for help. So it's really not an option to ask my kids to drive 3.5 hours to get the snowblower started. Remember, I hate pull starts. So I make a decision. What's the worst outcome? I work on it for an hour and it still won't start? What's the best outcome? I get it started. It's not rocket science. So I say to myself, what would my husband do? Is the gas full? Add a little more? Straight gas or gas oil mix? Is the oil low? Check it and fill it. Gas, how old is it? Should I drain the old gas and put in new? How do you drain it? Starter fluid, that might work. Okay, but where do you put it? Pull and clean the spark plug? The air filter, I think there's a new one in the barn. But I just pull, and I pull, and I pull, and I sweat, and I pull, and I cuss, and I pull, and it starts. The snowblower starts. But then, when I try to use it, the snow's too wet and heavy for it to work. Okay, what now? Start shoveling, or look at the extended weather report. Is it going to warm up? I could do nothing and just let it melt. Is it going to get colder? Get realistic. What areas are absolutely necessary to shovel? What looks nice but isn't all that important? Shovel, or just push it out of the way. I decide to push it to where the tractor blade can reach the pile. But I have to choose my weapon carefully. The coal shovel's easier than the big, wide snow shovel. The flat garden shovel is light enough that I can push it and actually lift it. It means a lot more steps, but it's so much easier than lifting the heavy snow. So I do it my way, with a shovel that I can handle. I do just absolutely what needs to be done, and I sell the snowblower. I only needed it when the snow was wet and heavy, and if it's not going to work then it's not worth the space in the garage. $350 in my pocket. If I plan to continue living in the North Woods, especially as I get older, I'm 65 now, I've got to figure out how to do better. Last winter, I decided I needed a four-wheeler with a plow. A new one was more money than I was willing to spend, especially since I didn't know how well it would work for plowing. If you've ever tried to buy a used four-wheeler, you know that a decent one at a decent price is nearly impossible to find. And if you find one, you need to jump on it immediately. My son would be the one I counted on to fix it if it broke down, and he said, buy a Yamaha. I'd find one on Marketplace, send him the link, but by the time he got a chance to look at it and tell me to go for it, it was gone. That happened about 5 times. Then I heard my husband saying to me, "Girl, you're gonna have to trust yourself." I found a Yamaha Grizzly. I jumped on it, but I needed to pick it up in Petoskey the next day after work. As usual, something that should have been pretty easy was not. I went to hook up the trailer, and I realized the 5-foot tailgate was off. How in the world was I going to get the tailgate back on by myself? It was cold, it was snowy, it was windy, and I was tempted to give up and just go back in the nice warm house. I had to give myself a pep talk. I had to decide, is this what you want? If it is, then you're just going to have to go do it. I hooked up the trailer. I moved the trailer to level ground. I dragged the gate and laid it behind the trailer. After several tries, I got it propped up on the edge of the trailer on one side and then did the same on the other. I pulled the pins and fought to line up the holes for the pins and finally managed to get the tailgate on the trailer. I always check a physical map or at least study the GPS map route before I go somewhere, but after all the trailer troubles, I just jumped in the Jeep, turned the heat up full blast to defrost my frozen fingers, and headed west. I finally turned on Google Maps, and it took me all back roads. There were frequent whiteout conditions. I drove for hours, never quite sure where I was. I realized that if I did get into trouble, I had no one to call. No one but the seller of the four-wheeler even knew I was on the road. I finally got there, but I missed the driveway to the house, and there was nowhere to turn around. I tried for 15 minutes to back up the trailer until finally a guy in a snowplow offered to back it up for me. I decided that even though he'd probably been sitting there laughing at my numerous attempts to back it up, I'd accept his help. I've never owned a four-wheeler, and I've only ridden them a few times in the summer. It was about 10 degrees, snowing, extremely windy, really cold. I took it for a drive. It started. It moved. It went forward. It went in reverse. I bought it, and I prayed it was worth $3,000. It was a lot of money, and it was one of my first big purchases since my husband had died. All the way home, a one-sided conversation rumbled around in my head. The pros, the cons, the what-ifs, questioning myself, did I make the right decision? I wasn't happy on the way home. I was worried. Suddenly, I realized the roads were much worse than they were on the way there, and Google Maps had been awfully quiet. Middle of nowhere, not on a main road, whiteout conditions. My phone had been sitting on the dash and had overheated. That's why there were no directions. Why is everything so much harder when you're alone? My husband could have backed up the trailer, or we wouldn't have missed the driveway in the first place. He would have gone over that four-wheeler and known if we should buy it or not. He probably would have haggled over the price and got it for less. With 2 incomes, $3,000 isn't much, but it's quite a bit with just one. On the way home, we would have been happy, talking about all the fun the kids and grandkids would have with the four-wheeler, and we'd be laughing about how unreliable technology is when you really need it, and together we would have figured out where we were. I kept driving, making sure I was going east or south until I hit a larger road. Then I did the same thing again until I was finally on a main road, and drove till I found a gas station. I filled up and sat there in tears, hoping that the phone would just cool down enough to work again. It did cool down, and it started to work, but I wasn't happy with all those back roads, so I looked at the map and took the main roads home. I did good. I'd made a good decision. I've had to replace 2 missing bolts on the four-wheeler, and so far I've only had a few issues with the winch and a flat tire, but that's it. So now I had a new shoveling option. The next light snow, I even plowed the driveway using the four-wheeler. It was kind of fun. You have to get quite a bit of speed going to move very much snow. I used it to clear the area near the garage, which I usually hand shoveled. Heavy snow and dropping temperatures were in the forecast for the next day, so I decided to pull it in the attached garage instead of the barn. I cleaned a spot in the garage for it, backed it in, so that I could just drop the plow blade and plow my way out. 6 inches of snow, windy, temperatures dropping into the teens. I got out there and started to clear near the garage. The winch cable snapped. I grabbed the cable and tried to pull it while releasing the winch. Not so smart. The frayed cable came right through my mittens and cut my hands. I tried to grab it with pliers. Nothing worked. The way it snapped, there was little cable to grab onto. There was no play in the cable because it had gotten caught under the other layers of cable. The four-wheeler and the blade were blocking both garage doors. It was 12 degrees and windy. I could only back up the four-wheeler and drag the blade backwards, but it was too close to the garage to be able to back it up. I decided that I'd have to get under there and take the blade off. It's not rocket science. It's probably a couple of bolts. I got a couple of crescent wrenches from the garage. Nope, there wasn't enough clearance to get the wrenches on the bolts. I went out to the barn and got socket wrenches. I got back under it on the cold ground. I should have brought metric sockets back to the barn for a metric set, which was not in a nice box, but scattered in the drawer with a million others. I put a set together, down under the wheeler again, and I have just one socket that fits. Of course, I'd rounded up one of each size, not remembering I needed one for each side of the bolt. Back to the barn. I'm cold. I'm frustrated. My hands are like popsicles. I've never been able to find a pair of women's work gloves that fit. And now I'm in tears too. Why do guys get mad when they get frustrated and women cry? I rarely cry out loud. The tears just start streaming down my cheeks. There's no value in tears, especially when it's only 12 degrees outside. Finally, I'm under there with the right socket wrenches, but I don't have enough strength to loosen the bolts. Righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, I double-check that I'm pushing the right way. Leverage? A hammer? Both? I got a hammer and a short pipe, slipped it on the end of the wrench. It worked. A few taps with the hammer, and it was loose enough for me to undo the nut, but I couldn't get the bolt out. The blade was leaning heavily on the bolts. My husband would have kicked it or shoved it. I didn't have the strength to do anything. I didn't have the strength to lift the bracket blade even a fraction of an inch. I needed to lift that bracket. Firewood and a hammer. I stuck a piece of firewood under the bracket, then another, and I hammered them in place. I tapped on the bolt with the hammer, then used the wrench to back the screw out of the hole. Success! The blade was off the four-wheeler. I was dirty and cold. I hadn't paid attention to the jacket I had on. Now it was another barn coat with grease and dirt. Oh well, I put the wheeler in the barn until the weather was warm enough to work on the winch. The blade was still laying in front of the garage doors. It was a bear to move. I inched it and wiggled it to the edge of the drive, stood it up, added several streamers of yellow caution tape so I wouldn't back into it. Decisions are so hard. Without realizing it, we're constantly making decisions. I'm always deciding how to tackle things. If I can or can't do it, should I buy it? Can I fix it? Can I afford it? My husband would have seen that cable was frayed and not grabbed it and cut his hand. He would have had the strength to loosen the bolts and move the bracket. He would have gotten the snowblower going rather than selling it. He would have known if the four-wheeler was any good and gotten a better price. Or would he? He didn't know everything. He was not always right. He made good decisions and bad. But as a widow, my mind clings to all the good things about him. Able to fix anything, able to build anything. He was funny, smart, kind, patient, and loving. He wasn't that way every minute of every day.
And coming up next, episode 5, That Up North Feeling. Being up north is a feeling as well as a destination. There are so many opportunities to make great memories. But a few weeks in the summer or a few weekends in the fall or winter are a bit different than living here year-round.
You've been listening to a Locally Up North podcast from a local citizen in our four-county community. If you're interested and have a podcast idea, please contact us by sending us a personal message on Facebook, News Talk 98.9.